Welcome to the Doing Life Together podcast. I'm Jonathan.
I'm Owen.
I'm Eli.
And I'm Evan.
Awesome. In this episode, we're going to talk about what it means to be exasperated and kind of explore the question, why are so many parents and children exasperated? In order to do that, we're going to answer the question that some of you may already have. What does the word exasperated mean? We're going to talk about why does it even matter that parents and children might be exasperated. We're going to talk about some practical things that are exasperating. And then we're going to discuss ways that you can become less exasperating yourself. Before we begin, we're going to go with our random question of the day.
Who in your family can't you believe you're related to? Yeah, I'd say Evan, because I'm like, we don't really look anything alike. I'm about 8 to 10 inches taller than him and about twice his weight.
Yeah,
and
I
he's
guess
also
say Evan for similar reasons.
a spaz.
What?
Bro just spazzed about being a spaz.
I'm not a spat.
Always, not always a spaz. I think that's fair. I think that makes sense. Most of the time when people see you two together, they're like, you can't really be brothers.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and you also said it, Evan?
Yeah, just similar reasons. I don't look like him, and he's smaller.
Pound for pound.
Evan, who would you say?
Probably Eli.
Okay.
'Cause he's
So we're going to
a
stick with
giant.
the... Go ahead.
What?
Go ahead. What were we going to say?
I was just going to say because he's a giant and I'm not a giant.
Regular sized.
Yeah.
I'm going to go with my sister. One of my sisters. Your Aunt Nicole.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we could be less the same or more different in some pretty...
What did you just say? I think you just mixed it up. That would mean you guys are like identical.
I
You
don't
don't
think
think
we
you
could
could be less the same, or you don't think you could be
More different is right.
All right. I don't think we could be more different in just a lot of the ways that we look at life, considering that we're siblings. I still love her. Don't mishear that. I still love my sister. We're just very different. All right. So that was the random question of the day. We've now identified the family member that we feel like we are least likely to be related to or something like that. So now we're going to talk about the word exasperate and what it means to exasperate. Came across this term recently when discussing parent and kid interactions with a group of teenagers. I was going through the Bible and came across Ephesians 6:4, which says, "Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord." So when we started talking about that, the very first thing the kids said, do you guys remember? It was...
what does
What
that
does
mean?
that mean?
What does exasperate mean exactly? Anyone remember what that word means?
Yeah.
Like,
It means to like frustrate or anger.
Irritate.
Frustrate or irritate intensely, which ironically enough was not the reason any of you said you didn't think the family member you were most surprised was in the family. Had nothing to do with being irritated. But frustrate or irritate intensely. And then we started talking about ways that parents and kids get exasperated with each other. But before we get there, let's talk about why as kids. So as kids, why do you even care about not becoming exasperated with or by your parents?
Well, because we're supposed to obey our parents and stuff, but it's pretty hard to do that when they're just always getting on your nerves or frustrating you.
Yeah, I would say like I definitely want to have a good and like strong relationship with my parents, and that can be really hard if I was constantly feeling exasperated and irritated anytime I was around them, and it would be really hard to build that connection with them because I wouldn't want to be around them at all.
I think from my perspective as a parent, I would say the same thing. Like, it's really important or we've always made it a goal to try to build really good relationships so that even when you have the choice to not be around, you want to be around. And I think if you're being exasperated all the time, it would be much easier to choose not to want to be around. So Eli, you said something else. You said something about obeying or following the rules of your parents, but it will be hard. Can you talk more about that?
Let me get that let me get a thought dialed in real quick. I would just say if you're gonna listen to someone and obey them, you gotta respect them. But it's especially as you get older, when you're young, you kind of are taught you just do whatever you're told and don't even think about it. But as you get older and you start to kind of have your own thoughts, it would definitely get harder to listen to your parents if you're always frustrated with them. And you might even feel like by not listening to them, you can kind of get back at them and also start to exasperate your parents and frustrate them.
Do you think your relationship with your parents and their ability to not exasperate you impacts how you interact with the rest of the world?
Yeah, because like if you are always angry at your parents, you're gonna like go out in the world and still just be angry at the world and then treat other people worse.
And I think on the other side of it, if your parents are not exasperating you, it can also affect how you interact with the world because you could potentially assume that everybody else has a good experience with their parents and everything, and kind of not potentially think of that as the reason they're having issues. So I think it's also important to realize that even if your parents don't, some do, and you got to give people grace when stuff happens.
Yeah, another thing with it is like I feel like because my parents didn't exasperate me a bunch when I was growing up, I learned how to interact with like adults, even if it was my parents and it was slightly different. It still just gave me like it made me more prepared to go out there and like be able to handle adults and have an adult conversation with people and be mature about things. But if like I didn't have that with my parents, then I would have had to figure it out like once I got to the real world, and then it would be like there would be a couple years of struggle in there for sure, and then I still might not end up with the right morals and approaches to those issues.
I think that was some really good commentary. I appreciate you guys opening up about that. So it sounds like it is important because however you learn to interact with your parents and whether or not they exasperate you or to the degree that they exasperate you impacts how they go out into the rest of the world and how they think about things. So it's really important to build on a foundation of not exasperating each other. So we've talked about what it means. We've talked about why it's important not to do it. So coming out of the conversation we had with the teens, I gave a talk about exasperating, and I provided 11 practical examples of things that I believe that people are doing today as parents to exasperate their kids. So we're going to go with a little bit of a quiz. Let's see what of those practical examples you guys remember from the talk I gave. All right. Who's got one? Go.
I think it was one of them was like living a distracted life, like not engaging with your kids and like spending quality time with them.
That was actually exactly what it was. And we talked about how you exasperate your kids when you don't engage with them when they're younger in free play, or you don't encourage them to get out and play on their own, or you don't demonstrate how to be away from your device. And so therefore you're always on your device and your kid just kind of associates that with how they should live. Yeah, so that was good. All right. What about another one?
There's one about like always having alcohol at like parties and stuff.
I think it was not showing your kids you can have fun without alcohol or something.
Yep, that was one. So you guys nailed it. You don't demonstrate how to have fun without alcohol. And the question I asked around that one was, when was the last time you had an alcohol-free party? And I talked about how that one was important because we tell kids all the time not to drink or drive, and that they don't need to have alcohol to have fun. But if they don't see it demonstrated in the home, then it exasperates them because the parent is saying, you don't do this, you shouldn't do this. But then the kids are saying, but that's what I see modeled. So that's a good one. Another one, any other ones you remember?
Not taking care of yourself. Was I one something about
Personal hygiene.
like
It was less about personal hygiene and more about self-care. So you
Yeah.
talk about like, hey, why don't you kids work out more, go outside and play, or why don't you eat better instead of eating all the junk food? But then your kids see you make really bad self-care choices. You either don't prioritize your own hobbies or you over prioritize your own hobbies. So your kids either think I shouldn't do anything that's important to me or I should only do what's important to me. So having a good self-care routines is another good one. What is something else that you do to exasperate your children?
not telling them you love them or you're proud of them?
Yep. You don't tell your kids you're proud of them or you love them. That's awesome. So that one we talked about how today either everything every kid does is awesome or they might grow up in a situation where they don't hear that anything that they do is awesome. But it's really about balancing that with some honesty, right? Like, hey, sometimes you do things that are awesome. Sometimes you do things that are not awesome. I'm going to recognize, just going to tell you I love you and I'm proud of you when you do things that are genuinely awesome. All right. Any more that you remember?
Not acknowledging that evil exists or something like that.
Yeah, that was one of the deeper ones, but it was talking about how you don't talk about how evil's a real thing. So, the Bible says that evil's real. And there's lots of examples of bad things that happen in the evil. And if you don't teach your kids that evil's a real thing, then it's been my experience and people start to grow to be angry or hate other human beings because they think that it's humans' fault. And so it's really important that you kind of talk about the reality of evil. All right, we got any more?
Yeah, there was one about like conflict, like not showing them how to deal with conflict.
Yeah, if you don't teach your kids how to manage conflict well or embrace that there are healthy ways to have conflict, then it can become really hard for them to go out into the world and have healthy disagreements with people. Or if they get into a relationship and they think, oh my gosh, we're having a problem, there must be something wrong with the relationship. It just doesn't teach them how to overcome. When you don't teach about healthy conflict, they sort of set about their life to try to avoid it. And so that's not really helpful because it's everywhere and you just need to learn to deal with it. All right. Any more examples that you guys want to share?
I feel like there was something about having a healthy relationship with your spouse or something.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah, that's right. So it's important to have a healthy relationship with your spouse. And that's all about, like, I don't know, teaching your kids that you love your spouse. That seems really obvious. But it's really important to help your kids understand that you love them, which is why that I love you, I'm proud of you stuff is important, but also that you love they're either their, if you're the dad, their mom, or if you're the mom, their dad, so that they know that what a healthy relationship, romantic relationship looks like, because that's what they're going to model when they grow up and become their own, when they grow up and they have their own relationships. Let's see. So I'm going to go right to the list. Self-care, we talked about that one. Conflict. Oh, what about the idea of having life goals? So as a family, it's important to have goals and talk about how you have goals and why you set a budget and how you decide how you're going to spend your money and why you make the career decisions that you make and other things. So it's really important to have those. It's really important to have goals that are communicated so that you can talk about them as a family and you teach your kids that goals are a real thing. Plus, it helps them have good conversations about why you make the decisions you make. Yeah, what's up, Evan?
I remembered one. Treating all your kids the same. Like you should do
Yes,
that.
you should not do that. And why is it important not to do that, Evan?
Because like Eli said earlier, me and him are very different people. So if you tried to like treat us the exact same, then none of us would we would both not find it right for us.
So that is a really important one. And then there's one more. For me personally, it's the most important one. Do you guys remember what that one was?
Did we talk about the one about like having like it'll exasperate your kids if you don't have a strong relationship with Christ?
No, we did not. That's the one. Thank you, buddy.
Yeah.
So that's the most important one for me, is that It can be really frustrating for your kids if you're a family that talks about how important your faith is, but then they see you act and respond and behave in ways that is totally opposite. Or if they don't see you practice good spiritual habits of your own. So it's really important that you manage to figure out how to have your own good spiritual habits so that your kids realize it's, your Christianity or other faith is not just something you talk about, but it's something you actually take seriously. So that's good. So I think we hit them all, which is awesome. So is there any other things that you guys can think of? So that was my list, but I'm sure there are other things that maybe you find exasperating or maybe you find exasperating as you interact with the world or your peers.
It's kind of a lot of the things we said are kind of revolved around it, but just hypocrisy in general. It's really frustrating when you're told to do something, but then the person that tells you to do something is doing the exact opposite.
I think that's pretty foundational. I would agree. A lot of that basis for exasperating is when what someone says doesn't match what they do, or they hold you to a standard of what they say versus what you see them do. So I think that's really solid. What else? What else is exasperating at the moment in the world?
I would say like breaking promises or just like flat out lying. Like you're preaching honesty and being a man of your word or whatever, and then you go out and you tell your kids you'll do something with them and then you don't do it or something like that. That would be very exasperating.
That's a good one. Now, when we talk about hypocrisy or keeping your word, obviously the goal is to strive to always do it.
Mm-hmm.
But what role does like forgiveness play in learning to not be exasperated?
Forgiveness is obviously very important, and you definitely have to be understanding that some things that maybe your parent thought that they could do for you didn't end up being possible, and that needs to be understood. So forgiveness is definitely key, but like obviously if it's just like constant things like you're promising you'll play football with your kids and then you just come home from work and you're exhausted, so you decide that you're not going to do it anymore or something like that, where it's just like you could totally do it but you just don't feel like it, sort of thing. Forgiving is important, but it would still be very exasperating to just have that happen.
So forgiveness important, but it can't be used as an excuse for bad behavior is what I hear you say. Other things that you find be exasperating as you go through life these days?
Like maybe not getting enough credit because you're young, or like people overlooking you because you're younger than them, just because you might not have quite as much experience or you're not as old as somebody else doesn't mean you can't provide good ideas. Or
Do you guys find that happens a lot?
not for me personally, no.
Yeah, especially not at this age. I don't really see it that often, but
I was just thinking about like in general that happens.
I could see it happen like when I start my career. There could be some like older employees or stuff that feel they're better than me because they've been doing it for longer.
It's a real thing. I experienced that when I started my career. To more quickly become accepted is to get really good at asking questions instead of always leading with opinions.
Mm-hmm.
People like to be asked questions and given the opportunity to be helpful before you are helpful to them. So that's one thing you can definitely do.
Mm-hmm.
All right, awesome. So let's close this out. So here's a couple practical steps for how to avoid being exasperating. So Eli mentioned it. Number 1, don't be a hypocrite. So Owen talked about there's room for forgiveness because we're all going to make mistakes, but the goal should be to make sure that what you say and what you do matches as much as possible. And certainly the standard that you hold other people to matches the standard that you have for yourself. It helps to have a set of values, beliefs, and goals that you're working towards, that you filter everything that you say and do through. That way there's that consistency. Be open to feedback and evaluate what you hear to find the shred of truth. So when someone takes the time to give you some feedback, just listen. It doesn't mean it's guaranteed to be 100% accurate, but at least try to find a little bit. And then learn how to communicate well. So the better you can communicate what you're doing, why you're doing it, and what you're hoping to get out of it, the easier it becomes for other people to not feel exasperated or irritated and frustrated completely. Is there anything else you guys can think of that would help someone be less exasperated?
I think being open to new ideas could help you not be exasperated as easily.
Oh, okay. So like instead of always assuming that you have the best ideas, being a little bit open to hearing what other people have to say. And
yeah.
Nice. Mixing in a question or two. Fantastic. All right, let's close this one out. Today we talked about being exasperating and how it's important for kids and parents to not exasperate each other. We said that exasperate means to frustrate or irritate a lot. Some of the reasons we said that it matters is that kids learn how to relate to other people in the home, and if they're exasperated by their parents, they're going to be less likely to go out and into the rest of the world and have healthy relationships or live well. We gave a list of 10 things that are currently exasperating. We're going to link to that in the show notes, but some of those were: you don't have a great personal relationship with Christ. One was you live a distracted life. Things like you don't communicate that you have goals. You don't tell your kids you love them or are proud of them. You don't help your kids manage conflict. We missed the one about you don't manage your emotions well, so we'll add that. But go out to the archimpacts.com or wherever you found this podcast, and we'll link to an entire article that talks about what are the reasons, some questions you can ask to make sure you're not being exasperating, and some actions you can take to be less exasperating. And then we just talked about how you can be less exasperating by avoid being a hypocrite as much as possible. So making sure your actions match what you say is important. You have values and goals that you filter your actions through. You're open to feedback and evaluate what others have to say, and you figure out how to communicate well. And that's going to wrap up this episode. So please consider a like and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Share this with friends and family. Check out our @Arch Impact Studio on YouTube, where you get lots of video content, and you can see why Eli and Evan would often be confused as not being siblings just based on their size. But we know that not to be true. All right. Until next time, go out and live your best life.